This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter account. It is Liam. Liam, Happy New Year to you, and welcome to episode 190, that's 90, of the DCAU Review.
That's right, 190. That's 10 more to go until our exciting 200th episode, which we have not figured out what we're reviewing yet. No pressure. But
hey, don't pull the curtain back that far. Come on, we have all these episodes planned all the way out through episode 1000. Come on.
Right. I mean, you did shoot down my idea to review Space Jam 2 again, but anywho.
Right, that's right. It's my veto. It's my one veto per year.
One every year. Every year he's going to use it on the same thing.
Right. Yep. Never ever.
You know what? I'm okay with that. Anyhow, yes, as you mentioned, Cal, it is a new year. But before we jump headlong into 2022, we thought it might be fun as sort of a year-end wrap-up as this episode's dropping. Of course, it's live anytime you listen to it, but the first time it'll be live is, of course, January the 1st, 2022. But before we get too far into the new year, we figured we would look back at 2021, not the year at large. Nobody needs to do that, but the year for our show, and including some of our favorite and in some cases least favorite things we reviewed, our highest ranked episodes of the year for both of us, and some of our other favorite DCAU things in 2021. It was, again, just talking about our show, not making any judgments about the rest of the world. 2021, a pretty fun year for us, Cal.
That's right. It was. We continue to climb. We get new followers and listeners every single day. So thankful for that. This has been our best year when it comes to interactions. We've had a lot of success on social media. Thank you for those of you who follow us and interact with us on a weekly basis, sometimes daily basis, whether on Instagram at DCAU Review or the aforementioned Twitter account at DCAU Review that Liam mans up for us. It's a lot of fun to interact with everybody. We've had some very kind people say some very kind things to us on a fairly regular basis, and we appreciate the regulars that interact with us and reach out to us and send us. We had a couple people send us gifts this year and support the podcast monetarily. So buy some shirts and hats and all that. So we're very thankful for those that we've had the opportunity to interact with. But beyond that, Liam, this was our best year when it came to the amount of streams. We had close to 25,000 streams overall, which may not be a lot in the grand scheme of the podcast world, but for our little podcast and the niche within the niche within the niche that is DCAU or DC Animation, you and I call that a win, I would say, and is a humbling thing at times to know that we're able to bring people hopefully some joy and some escape from the not so great real world of 2021. And it's an honor for us to be able to come on here each week and talk about these cartoons and share our love, and to have people interested in what we have to say, and also giving us the opportunity to hear your thoughts on these same episodes that we so love and hold near and dear to our hearts.
Absolutely. We always say that, but it bears repeating. Our favorite part of doing this show, other than hanging out with each other and reminiscing about these cartoons that we've loved since we were kids, is interacting with all of you and getting your opinions on what we're reviewing, what we should review next, your own interpretations, if you think we're right, if you think we're wrong, and as you said, Cal, a lot of great people sharing their own personal memories, either from their childhood or even their young adulthood when they were first watching these, or when they go back and rewatch them so they can listen to our episodes. It's always fun hearing other people's sides of the story, so to speak, on this stuff we review. And I think we've built a nice little community of some really cool and fun people to interact with.
Yeah, and that's an amazing segue. Speaking of people and fun people that we've gotten to interact with, you and I this year launched a couple of new things and had a couple more special guest correspondents for the first time. We launched the Discuss This League format, sort of a companion piece where we can branch outside of our normal discussion here and bring in some of our friends and people out in the Twitter sphere and YouTube sphere and experts on both DCAU and DC fandom and bring them in for conversations. We started the Discuss This League series. We've done 2 editions of that where we talked about not only the idea before it was an actual solidified thing. We talked about the idea, the rumors constantly swirling about a Batman the Animated Series reboot that, of course, would eventually come out and be a Batman Caped Crusader announcement. But we had Maddie from Watchtower Database, and we had Chris from the Tim Talk podcast on with us to talk about that and some of our ideas, and if they were to reboot the DCAU at some point, what those look like, and what we wouldn't want to see, what we would want to see. It was a lot of fun and great conversation, but that wasn't the only Discuss This League episode we had this year, was it?
No, of course, 2021, among other things in superhero pop culture, will be remembered, of course, as the year that the Snyder Cut was finally released. And so we, of course, had to do a episode about that. We had a really fun panel on that episode. You and I kind of took a back seat very willingly. And we had not only James from Watchtower Database returning to our show after previously helping us with the review the year before, but we also had the great honor of being joined by Dave and Liv from the Pizza and Parsecs podcast. Just 2 of the nicest people you've ever met, and they're so great, and they're really, that episode was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, I think, for both of us, Cal, because we had to do very little work. Yep. And we just let 3 funny, smart people share their opinions, not only on the Snyder Cut, but on kind of the future of the DC live action film universe, or multiverse as it's looking like it's becoming, and fan campaigns as a whole, and lots of other stuff. Just that was a lot of fun for us to just sit back and chat nerdy with some of our favorite people.
That's right. It was a fantastic time. And as you mentioned, I'm actually wearing my Pizza and Parsecs shirt tonight, which is awesome. But I was an awesome thing. We're hoping to do more of those, hopefully this year as well. If you have any ideas, listeners, and send us ideas for what topics you might want to hear a future Discuss This League episode covering. And maybe if you have some ideas of who you would like to hear featured on it, send those to us at DCAU Review as well. We'd love to invite some of our favorite friends and personalities onto the podcast. But Liam, we also had 2 new special correspondents, as we call them. One of them being someone who, actually both of them international correspondents at that. Right. So we exited the borders of the United States, and we went to the land down under for our very first one, having Nathan McKenzie from Superman the Animated Podcast on the show. And man, that was a fun one, because we reviewed the Superman Animated Series episode Livewire with him, that being episode 142, which you can, of course, check out in the archives at DCAUreview.com. I mean, that was a great one, a fun time speaking with Nathan, who is just such again, an amazing person, a fun interview, and love hearing his thoughts and opinions on this show that he holds so near and dear and loves so much. And you guys kind of got to nerd out about your equal love for the Man of Steel.
Yeah, and it's funny, we've mentioned, I think, both of them now, but we also had the opportunity this year to be guest stars on other people's podcasts. Those podcasts were the Pizza and Parsecs podcast, and of course Nathan's show, Superman the Animated Podcast, in 2021. But having Nathan on our show was so much fun, and talking about a pretty monumental episode of Superman in the debut of Livewire. It was a lot of fun having him on there, hearing his take, and kind of similarly to when we've talked when we've gone on other people's show to talk about stuff that we've already reviewed, hearing him get to revisit an episode that he had already reviewed in Livewire was a lot of fun. So yeah, always great fun talking with Nathan, whether he comes over to our show or whether we go over and visit him on his show. It's always a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. But we weren't done just yet. Later on in the year, as we were doing our latest month of Batman the Animated Series episodes, we would once again cross the Atlantic at this point and head over to Europe, where we would interview artist and all-around good person George Kaltsoutis on the program, and he got to review Blind as a Bat with us, which was episode 181 of the podcast.
That's right. George is such an incredibly talented guy, and he was nice enough to come on the podcast with us and talk about what he liked, what he didn't like. We got to kind of pick his brain about what inspired him to become an artist, and talk about some of those incredible pieces that he's created based on Batman the Animated Series, including for the episode that we reviewed, Blind as a Bat, with him. But just hearing George's own experiences with Batman the Animated Series, what it meant to him, and kind of the character of Batman as a whole, so much fun. And it's always really fun when we get to have an actual professional on the show, and really just have an interesting professional artist. I mean, specifically, and hearing him break down sort of the visual style of the show in a maybe a bit more technical and scholarly manner than we can on any given week is it's always a great education for us. And it was absolutely phenomenal having George on the show.
That's right. And we are also looking forward, of course, to having a few more guest correspondents on in the year 2022. So keep an eye out for that. We may even mention one of them by name a little bit later on that we've secured for the pod. But Liam, I guess it's time now that we've kind of tooted our own horn and given ourselves pats on the back about how great everything was for the pod in 2021. We tend not to try and focus on the negative as a lot, as you mentioned. There's a lot of that already in the world. we don't need to add to it. So, we tend to, even the episodes that we don't like, we take it with a bright side, look on the bright side of things. We typically, even the episodes that we don't care for, we try to make light of, or we try to find a silver lining, so to speak. But we would be remiss if we're going to talk about our favorite episodes and the episodes that we ranked the highest in 2021. I think it would be fair to say that there's also a bottom of the list for the episodes that we didn't quite care for.
That is right. There were a few that ended up in the lower side of our ranking system. Of course, we base our episode rankings on our final scores, which we get from our main categories, which are, of course, plot, visuals and animation, music, and voice acting. And while, like you said, we try to find a good thing to say even about the bad episodes, there is always, there are some winners and there are some losers when you review a show every single week for an entire year.
That is right. So we're going to go through here and rank some of our. We didn't. I allowed for a top 5 for our top picks for this year, but for the bottom of the list, I didn't do 5 separate ones for each of us. There's a lot that kind of fall in the middle, that middle ground of 27, 26, 25. But we have some that fell kind of below that. So we're going to focus on those. And honestly, what I found out when I was compiling this list is that you are a lot kinder to a lot of these episodes than I am. I tended to have the lower scores on most of these episodes. That you were not that far off, as we often state. Your scores tend to be somewhat close to, if not right around what I give. It just happenstance, whether it's because we're blood related or if we're on the same wavelength or what have you. But for this, I would say I'm a little bit more of a higher critic, though your score for one of these episodes is the lowest of the year, so you do get that designation. But when it came to our higher end of our episodes, you were also a little bit more generous with the things that you gave. But we'll talk about that once we get to our top 5 here. But we'll start out, Liam, with one that kind of fell in the middle of the pack there, that wasn't, I don't think, bad, but I think it was one that we covered recently, and this is a Static Shock episode. And we always say this when we're grading these Static Shock episodes, especially the first 2 seasons of Static. It's so hard to try and put one of these shows up against a Batman the Animated Series show and say, all right, grade these the same exact way, because really you're looking at 2 things that had nothing to do with one or the other than having a supervising producer and Alan Burnett, who worked on both of the shows, be involved. Everything else was completely and totally separate, supposed to be separate. So we take that with a grain of salt when we're looking at these Static episodes. However, when we reviewed the episode Grounded just a few months back in the month of November, in episode 184, you and I came in with scores of, you gave the score at 25 and I gave the score at 26. Again, sort of middle of the road. They're not awful and not terrible, but I think that episode just has the designation of being remembered as the episode that should have been a Scooby-Doo episode.
There's a weird evil-ish janitor and a bunch of teenagers running away from a big monster. Everything about that screams less Static Shock, more Scooby-Doo for sure. But I think that's definitely one where maybe our score isn't high, but I would have fond memories of it just because I thought it was so silly and over the top that I thought it was pretty funny, and there's some good like slapstick comedy in it. So yeah, not a great episode by any means, but some fun stuff in there along the way.
Yes, and I think we ended up with that one deciding, hey, this isn't an episode that we would recommend as a must-see, or go and watch this. But we did say that if you put it on, that your kids will probably enjoy it if you're watching it with kids. Or there's nothing offensive about it. You might get a chuckle here or there. You might enjoy the slapstick, as you mentioned. There's certainly parts of it that it's not Unity by any means.
No,
it's not Cat Scratch Fever. It's not one of the lowest of the lows that we've ever ranked here. So
it's been a while since we've had a single digit. Spoiler alert for the rest of this list of 2021, but it's been a while since either of us have given anything a single digit score. So there is that's the silver lining to these lower ranked episodes of 2021.
That's right. So moving to the next lowest ranked episode was The Dark Heart, which we covered way back in March. That one being episode 148. Liam, you didn't have as many issues with this episode, I guess, as I did. I ended up with a score of a 24 out of 40. You gave it a 28. So, March of 2021 feels like 10 years ago. So honestly, going back and attempting to figure out what it was that I didn't specifically like about this episode would be very, very difficult to do. I can tell you that I didn't love the visual and the animation. I gave that a 5. I didn't love the plot. I gave that a 6. Mm-hmm. And the music, I gave it a 6 also. But this is one of those episodes that honestly, when you look back at it, I think maybe I was upset with the whole nanotechnology thing being used as another plot point because of how many times it's used. But other than that, it's not an episode that's offensive. It's a part of that Cadmus story arc. So yeah, you kind of have to have it as a must see. So despite the score, again, it's not something that was offensive or that I would say don't ever watch this. In fact, I think we both said you had to watch it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's no question if you're going through either the whole DCAU or even just Justice League, I think this is that episode's absolutely a must watch. And I think there's a little disappointment in it's one of the few episodes where we see almost the entire expanded Justice League in action at the same time. Mm-hmm. And they're just fighting little bugs for the whole episode. There's not a lot of like visually interesting action. There's the end where and then it also sort of being centered around, you've got all these characters: Superman, Wonder Woman, Supergirl, Green Lantern, all these incredible characters, and Batman, and all of them. And then we're focusing on the Atom, the smallest hero of them all. I think there's some poetry in that from the from a narrative standpoint. But yeah, as an episode, if you've seen it before and you know that, well, this episode as a standalone isn't that great, but it leads to more stuff, I can see why on a rewatch, this is one that maybe is actually hurt a little bit watching it in a vacuum and not watching it as part of like a giant full JLU rewatch, where maybe this one you just go in there and you see the plot points and you get some action and you're done. But yeah, I think watching this one by itself maybe exposed a few more of the perceived, at least from our perspective, some flaws that maybe we wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
There you go. And next on our list of lowest ranked, we are going from highest to lowest ranked here for our worst episodes. Next on the list, another one that you did not necessarily dislike as much, but that would be The Hand of Fate, which kicked off our month of magic, or Magic May, back in May, episode 156. This, of course, being designated as the episode of Superman the Animated Series that would debut the character of Dr. Fate. And again, this episode, I definitely remember the things that I didn't care for this episode. That being not only the fact that there's no real backstory given for Dr. Fate, he just sort of exists. We don't understand how Superman knows him, but it's definitely intimated that they have a friendship. They're aware of each other. There's no explanation of how Superman knew that he existed. And we have the villainous Karkul, who has the distinction of having the worst overproduced voice to date in our memory, to the point where it's difficult to hear the character or understand what he's saying in the final battle between him and a reverb heavy Dr. Fate as well.
Yeah, there's some real strange decisions made from a sound design, which is, yeah, I think, yeah, I didn't dislike it nearly as much as you did. I think the visuals of that episode, the crazy monster designs, Karkul takes over the Daily Planet and turns Lois and Jimmy and all of those the Metropolis people into these crazy creatures, and you see these kind of really horrific transformations that a lot of them go through. So I think there is some fun stuff visually, but yeah, from a narrative standpoint, like you mentioned, we don't know exactly where Superman met Dr. Fate or why, Dr. Fate is initially very uninterested in helping Superman, but then Superman decides to go back and try to fight Karkul anyway, and that inspires Dr. Fate. And I like, again, I'm as a big Superman fan, I like the idea of him pulling this old grizzled former hero back into the fire, so to speak. But yeah, and then the ending isn't, from my recollection, it's not a bombastic finale. There's kind of just some tussling, and then a tablet needs to be recreated, and some sort of chant needs to be done to put Karkul back to sleep or whatever. So yeah, it's not a super visually interesting, or it's not a super narratively interesting episode. But yeah, I think the icing on the cake for why this makes our worst of the year list is definitely the sound design. You really, and again, we were watching this on HBO Max with the updated HD version and everything, and we could still have the a nice quality Blu-ray speaker. We watched this one together, and we still couldn't understand anything he was saying. So yeah, thumbs down for that. For the sound design alone, probably makes this deserve to be on the worst of the year list.
Yeah, I gave it a negative bonus point. So when you give it a negative bonus point, you take a point away. That means that you know that it's in rarefied air at that point. That's only been a few times that we've taken points away. So that holds that distinction, that infamous distinction at this point. Moving on to our next episode, Liam, we head to the future.
The future, Cal?
That's right, Liam, all the way to the year 2039 or 50 years in the future, whenever now is. That, of course, Batman Beyond, with the episode we covered back on February the 13th, episode 145 of the pod, which was The Last Resort, which, for my recollection, was not an episode we had been too familiar with or had too many nostalgic memories for. But boy, when we got into this episode, we quickly realized that there was a lot of stuff that had to happen narratively to make this make any sense, and a lot of things that they had to ignore that we knew about the characters in order for this episode to happen. And it was kind of hard to accept some of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of like weird stuff in this episode that like there's apparently like a law in Gotham that like parents are going to be held criminally liable for like their children's crimes or something, and so they're sent, all the kids, including one of Terry's classmates, is it Blaze or no, Chelsea gets sent to this, you know, terrible reform school that's really more like a prison, and some sort of like they're sort of hypnotizing the kids and keeping them up all night. And like I feel like that isn't like a terrible idea for a story on its own, but then you don't really have a good payoff to it. They also add in this character that we've never heard of before, who was like Terry's friend from Juvie, who's also like a little bit office rocker, and then he and Terry team up to break out of solitary, and then the kid tries to kill the owner of the school. And meanwhile, a lot of these problems could have been solved if Batman remembered that his suit could turn invisible, because there's a whole action sequence where he's trying to hide from spotlights, and then he gets attacked by guards, and he resolves that situation by eventually turning invisible. But he waits until like 5 minutes into the scene to do it. So I think I remember us being pretty frustrated from a narrative standpoint, and from them, it's a lot of telling and not showing when it comes to like stuff about Terry's backstory, which again, all of those topics could be interesting on their own. And then, you know, Terry having been to juvenile detention, and maybe you could have shown that he was, you know, not sure about this new facility, and not wanting people to go down a similar route to him, and things like that. There's a way to make that story interesting, but the final product as it is just not great.
Yeah, we did induct another member of the worst dads of the DCAU with that episode, inducting Chelsea's dad, who forced her into going into this internment camp like facility. So there was that, but yeah, we both gave plot a 4 out of 10 for that episode. So neither of us were big fans of that or the visuals for that matter. So a rare swing and a miss from a Batman Beyond episode when it comes to that sort of thing. But we are into season 2, headed into season 3 of Batman Beyond. So that's when the stories start to get a little bit less adult themed and a little bit more teenage angst, as we've noted several times. But moving on, Liam, number 2 on our list is the Superman the Animated Series episode Monkey Fun, which this was one of the very first episodes that we covered back in January, that episode being 141 in the archives. This one, you and I both did not care for too much, as I gave it a score of 21 out of 40, and you gave it a 23 out of 40. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned it, but The Last Resort got a 21 and a 22 from both of us. So you liked this one a little bit more than The Last Resort, but I ended up giving it the same exact score. What went wrong with this episode, other than the fact that Lois is a terrible human being that decides to allow Jimmy Olsen to make Jimmy Olsen selfishly watch this space monkey that came back and was given to her by a scientist from a laboratory, who just said, "Hey, this monkey we launched up into space 20 years ago hasn't aged, hasn't done anything. He's been in suspended animation. Let me send him home with Lois."
Man, like, if we should have known that Professor Hamilton was not a good guy long before the JLU plot twist, man, because what a weird guy. That episode, it opens with a flashback to Lois's childhood, where Lois's father has allowed this monkey to like become a member of the family and bond with his two small children, Lois and Lucy.
Speaking of worst DCAU dads, by
yes,
the way.
another contender here.
Right.
General Lane rips the chimp out of Lois's arms, and then sends him into space, where
makes them watch him be launched into space.
And there's like a lot of weird like dark comedy where he's like, Titano will be having so much fun, and then it cuts to him screaming bloody murder in the shuttle, like he's like this terrified animal. And then yes, as you mentioned, Superman finds him in space some 20 years later, and brings them back to Earth, at which point Superman and Professor Hamilton immediately pawn the mutant space monkey off on Lois, who immediately, as you said, pawns him off on Jimmy. And we find out that through some sort of sci-fi mumbo jumbo, whatever the energy or the elements that was surrounding these asteroids that Titano was encased in causes him to grow. And so we get our King Kong type episode as Superman fights the giant monkey. There's some fun to be had there. There's some very wacky comedy. Dana Delaney is very funny in that episode. There's a lot of really funny lines in it, but it is just a bizarre episode, and it's just a series of terrible decisions made by everyone. And then Superman's kind of a jerk in it, because then even though he knows it's just like a scared animal, he's like, your monkey friend's going down, Lois. And then the problem is solved by like a Three Stooges. They solve it by playing Pop Goes the Weasel over a loudspeaker, and that's how their problem gets solved.
Just incredible. Thank you for reminding me of the trauma that we experienced in watching that episode. I gave plot in that episode a 2 out of 10. That tells you how much, and you weren't that far off with a 4 out of 10. So neither of us cared for the plot itself, but my goodness. All right, well, Liam, that will bring us to our lowest rank episode of the year, and that is, unfortunately, again, we talk about this a lot, and we mentioned it before, so I won't go do it again, but it is a Static Shock episode, and that is the episode Bent Out of Shape. And I think this suffered from mainly having a terrible visual and animation score from both of us, and just kind of middle of the road in every other category. So
yes,
it really suffered the fate of just having some of the worst animation to date that we've seen in some of those older Static episodes.
Yeah, I mean, because we've now I believe we reviewed the first 3 appearances of Rubber Band Man in Static Shock, and all of those are within the first 2 seasons. So even within the sort of grading on a curve, we liked his first appearance, and then not too far off in the past, we just covered another appearance of his late last year, and we really enjoyed that episode as well. So even within the season 2 animation and visual parameters, we've been able to enjoy Static and specifically Rubber Band Man episodes. But yeah, that episode just has some really rough animation. Really, and again, not something you see a lot with a more simplistic style like the Static Shock episodes, but a lot of guys like off model, heads too big, bodies too small, some weird like sizing issues and scaling issues as far as like the sides of furniture or items in the background and stuff like that. It's just some really strange choices made, and I believe the animation studio they worked with on that episode was not one that had done a lot of episodes, which makes sense.
It was actually that was the one that actually 2 different animation studios ended up coming up with the final product.
That's right.
You had 2 studios that were likely not communicating with each other, or that hadn't worked with each other before, one or the other, or both. And that ended up with having a unfortunate result of being just a really ugly looking episode.
Yeah, and with a character like Rubber Band Man, that's usually a slam dunk for visuals, because you can do so much fun, and the sky's kind of the limit with a character like that on what you can have them do with all the bending and stretching and shape changing and all of that. And it's just a real ugly looking episode. And that, yeah, like you said, I think that kind of sunk what otherwise maybe would have been another sort of average run of the mill episode from us.
That is right. As you mentioned, we've liked a lot of the Rubber Band Man episodes. So that it's not the show itself, it's that episode of that show. So yeah, that was the lowest ranked episode of the year. So as we mentioned, Liam, we don't like to focus on the negative too much. So why don't we parlay here to talking about what we loved this year, our top ranked episode. We'll volley back and forth here. Starting with my first episode, Liam, we have an all-time classic episode from episode 152. So we started that, the first episode that we covered in April, when we jumped back into covering our Batman the Animated Series episodes. An all-time classic, a Paul Dini masterpiece, The Man Who Killed Batman. I gave this one a 36 out of 40. You were not that far off and gave it a 35 out of 40, but this one is just a classic for many, many reasons. It's one of those stories that you don't expect to see coming. A narrative told by this Sid the Squid. We get some guest appearances from the Joker and Harley Quinn. A very moving scene where they have a funeral for Batman and then shove Sid the Squid into the coffin and push him down, only for him to be saved by the Dark Knight after this harrowing tale that he supposedly had been the one to off the Batman. Of course, the viewer is able to see that it was by happenstance, but the narrative being that this low-life thug that was really just a goofball that could barely stand up straight was the one to finally knock off the Batman, and all of the hijinks that goes along with the Joker being jealous of that. So it's a classic. It's one that if you are familiar with Batman the Animated Series, you more than likely hold it near and dear as well. But a fun episode, and one that was finally glad to cross off the list of episodes that we've been able to cover.
Absolutely. It's a great one. That Joker scene you mentioned, I think Mark Hamill is on record as saying that that's his favorite or most memorable Joker scene in the entire animated series for him. I think he's repeated it by heart a few times at various cons and Q&As and things he's done over the years. So yeah, that's a really special episode to I think anyone that's watched Batman the Animated Series before. And yeah, it's an all-time classic, so definitely deserves to be in our top episodes of the year here.
And that's right, Liam. And so with yours, your number 5 ranked of our top favorite episodes of the year actually comes from the world. Well, it's all the same world, but The Man of Steel is our very first episode of the year.
That's right. My pick, also a Paul Dini penned script, that being Mixia's Spixelated, the very first episode of 2021 that we did, covered all the way back in episode 139. Just a little window into the bizarre mind. It's a very like classic, almost Looney Tunes-esque episode. Mixie Spitlick, the voice of Gilbert Gottfried, and the scripting of Paul Dini, and some really tremendous animation on display as well. It's a really fun episode of Superman sort of being the road runner to Mixie Spitlick's Wile E. Coyote, but also Superman sort of just becoming so Superman is like gets into a depression in this episode because he just gets so tired of having to deal with Mixie every 90 days, and it all comes to a head in this sort of final silly confrontation, and it's a lot. It's quite a bit of fun. There's a lot of little Easter eggs in there from things that Mixie Spitlick turns various people into. There's a newspaper strip with a lot of in jokes from some of the people who worked on the show, like Dan Reba and Glenn Murakami and some of those folks. So it's a big wacky sort of Looney Tunes-esque edition of Superman the Animated Series, and just such a ball. And I ended up giving that a 35 out of 40. So just so much fun.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun, and definitely, even as goofy as the episode is, as you mentioned, we compared it to a Looney Tunes episode. It fits based on the character that's included there. We both loved it. I actually also gave it a 35 out of 40, so both of us enjoyed that one. Moving on, Liam, to my next number 4 in our top 5 favorite picks of 2021. Mine was another Batman the Animated Series episode, and actually not that far off from The Man Who Killed Batman. Actually, the very next episode. So we had I had a bunch of great ones that month from my recollection. This one on April the 10th, episode 153, that being the Batman Animated Series episode Mudslide, which is the follow-up, of course, to the original Clayface episode, Feet of Clay. This one being Liam, it's interesting when I look at my scorecard, I gave the plot a 6. So I didn't love the plot. It's not the highest. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. But I also ended up giving visuals and animation, music, and the voice acting all 10s. Wow. And a bonus point for the title card. So this is a case of one of those episodes where, again, the plot is certainly interesting. Of course, Matt Hagen has roped this woman that's a fan of his into being, his sort of his savior in a certain way, or somebody that he's roped into believing that she can heal him and fix him. And of course, he's kind of roped her into doing some of this nefarious behavior in order to do his bidding, in order to get him these chemicals. I do remember the plot not loving that Batman was the one that sort of prevented him from, even though the chemicals were stolen from various different places, that he prevented him from really getting the antidote completely using the stolen chemicals. There was a little bit of a interesting that Batman shut this thing down in the middle of it, but still the music, the visuals, and the voice acting for that episode, of course, the great Ron Perlman, once again reprising his role as Clayface / Matt Hagen. Just a great episode overall. And again, I think it's a little surprising to me that I ranked it that high. Probably wouldn't have picked that, but it's an episode that, based on the sum of its parts, ended up being one of my top picks for the year.
Yeah, soundtrack is what I think about when I think about Mudslide more than anything. Probably there's just some tremendous that Clayface theme is way up the list for me of my favorite pieces of music from any of the great composers that worked on these shows. So yeah, I think even if the plot wasn't a home run there, I think that's, like you said, definitely an example of the other three categories sort of lifting it up to being one of the best of the year.
That is right. And speaking of Batman the Animated Series, specifically that month, Liam, the very next episode, episode 154, was your next on the list of top episodes of 2021.
That's right. So the very next episode 154, we covered Paging the Crime Doctor, which is a really interesting episode. It's kind of, as we said, it's still in that first run of Fox Kids episodes before some of the I think before Fox sort of started hammering down on them a little bit more about what they could put in and how much Robin needed to be in every episode and things like that. This was I think this goes up there with episodes like It's Never Too Late, where it's a really interesting story of this brother of Rupert Thorne who has lost his license to practice and is sort of making his money as a mob doctor now, and sort of hates himself, but then Thorne needs an operation, and he needs someone he can trust to help operate on him, and so he kidnaps Leslie Tompkins, who of course is Bruce's one of Bruce's best friends and confidants, and sort of a mother figure to him. And to me, it's a very good and interesting episode from a drama perspective, and from just sort of, again, taking on a lot of subject matter when it comes to some interesting stuff about sort of the less super criminal side of the Gotham underworld. But really, what I think this episode will be remembered for, certainly by both of us, especially me, as reflected in it, making it into my top 5 of the year, is the very final scene where Bruce Wayne goes to see the doctor in prison after he's turned himself in, and asks, agrees to help him and then sort of give him financial aid in exchange for one thing. And as the doctor sort of has his guard up and is expecting, a rich man to come asking for some sort of illicit favors, Bruce just asks him to tell him about his father. And you hear a musical cue, which is very similar to one from a previous episode that had to do with Bruce, kind of feeling disconnected or feeling like he was disappointing his father and his parents' memory. So bringing a return of a certain musical cue from Shirley Walker, and just a really beautiful moment in voice acting from Kevin Conroy. It's just it's one of, I think, the best ending scenes of any episode we've ever covered.
Yeah, I can hear the musical cue in my head, not having watched this episode, since April. And it, like, there's a reason we both gave music for that episode a perfect 10. You gave voice acting a 9 out of 10, as did I. The only thing we really disagreed on was the plot. I gave the plot just a tick lower, but you ended up giving it 36 out of 40. I gave it a 35 out of 40. It's one of those episodes, again, when we've gone back and reviewed these episodes, kind of thinking the episodes that maybe we didn't care for as much as children because they weren't as colorful, or they didn't have, one of the main Batman rogues, or there wasn't as much action. When you're an adult watching this through this critical lens, it's amazing the stories that you appreciate and the things about it that really hit home for you. And that final scene of being able to appreciate Bruce just having this desire to connect with his dad, man, I've got chills. I've just got chills thinking about it. It's so good.
And the way I think one of the things I was really in awe of was, not that it's a secret of how talented Kevin Conroy is playing that role, but he's doing the sort of the fake Bruce Wayne voice, the sort of higher pitched, the voice that the character sort of puts on when he's in public. But in that moment, when he asks to be for stories about his father, it's so like hopeful and vulnerable, even though he's still there's still a little layer of deception in the fact that he's putting on this voice. It still feels so earnest, and it really feels like, the child who's just, reaching out for any sort of, connection to this father that he lost so violently at a young age. It's really just incredibly moving. So yeah, just absolutely deserves to be in this list.
That's right. All right. So Liam, moving to my next episode, we will move on to the month of May, or Magic May, as we were calling it, or the month of magic. And our next episode is one that was somewhat controversial when we saw it on the docket. I think you and I both had very strong differing opinions about this episode, and honestly ended up being the biggest differential of the year, the biggest scoring differential between the two of us. There was a 10-point differential between our final scores, which I'd have to check, but might be a record when it comes to episodes that we've covered thus far in our little over 4 years now that we've done this podcast. So So interestingly enough, the episode, of course, is This Little Piggy, the Justice League Unlimited absolute classic. Where Wonder Woman gets turned into a pig, of course, and Batman has to do what he can to rope Zatanna into helping him find a cure, so to speak, for her, to get her transformed back. We get some Wonder Bat shipping. We, of course, get the incredible, speaking of Kevin Conroy scene of him singing "Am I Blue?" We have Buona Beast makes an appearance and gets some amazing, memorable lines also, and helping support Batman in finding Wonder Woman, or Wonder Pig as she is dubbed. It's an all-time classic just for the goofiness on my side of things. This tells you about how much we enjoyed this episode and how much you didn't enjoy this episode, I should say. My plot score was a perfect 10. Yours was a 4. And that was where we disagreed the most, because everything else was above a 7 or higher for us for the rest of our scores. So I ended up giving this a 38 out of 40, and as one of those classic episodes that we kind of knew when we decided to expand beyond the borders of just Batman the Animated Series and cover these episodes, that when we got to covering this one was going to be one that we likely were going to disagree on.
Yeah, this is one we've been disagreeing on off the air about since we were both kids. So nothing really changed too much. No, I like I said, I think I'm sure I said it in the review. I think there's things to enjoy about it, but and there's certainly some of the comedic moments I think hit really well. It's another Paul Dini written episode. So I understand why people love it, and I understand and I want to appreciate everyone who politely told me I was wrong about this. We got probably more feedback for this episode than almost any other that we covered all year, and if anything, people I seem to enjoy my exasperation as you gave it such a high score compared to mine. But yes, whether I like it or not, it has a certain iconic status in the DCAU for all the reasons you've mentioned.
That is right. It's a classic. It's for a lot of people. A lot of people love it, and for those that don't, you're wrong. Moving on to your next entry, Liam, is actually our first crossover. You may or may not find this episode later on in my list, but we have another Batman the Animated Series episode, Shock, 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 for your next entry on our favorite episodes of 2021.
Yeah, and since this is a little higher up your list, we can save the banter on it for when we get to it on your side of the docket. But I'll just say, yeah, it's Shadow of the Bat parts 1 and 2, which we covered just a little while ago back in episode 180, the first appearance of Batgirl, and it's definitely a deeply memorable and fun episode that we watched a whole lot as kids. So like I said, we can save the longer form discussion of this for when we get to it in your list. But yeah, definitely an all-time classic.
That's right, Liam. So my next entry on our list here is one that also may or may not cross over. So I will save the banter for when we cover it, perhaps on your list. But it's actually outside of our standard DCAU and comes in from the multiverse, our Elseworlds coverage on episode 175 of the Batman Brave and the Bold episode, Chill of the Night.
An absolute classic. And as you said, we will be talking about that in just a few minutes, but that brings me to my number 2, my second highest ranked episode of the year, that being another 2-part episode that we covered during our month of Magic / Magic May, but this time for good reason, that being the 2-part Justice League classic, The Terror Beyond parts 1 and 2, written by Dwayne McDuffie, and some really fun action in this. It's a Hawkgirl kind of focused story. It's a small amount of league. We also have crossover characters. We have Dr. Fate returning. We have Aquaman returning, and some crazy villain. Solomon Grundy returns, and it kind of becomes a Hawkgirl and Grundy story by the end of it. And Grundy ends up making this sort of beautiful heroic sacrifice in the name of reclaiming his soul that he lost years ago in this curse. And meanwhile, Hawkgirl sort of confronts her own people's lack of belief, her own lack of faith, and it kind of comes to a head, and as Grundy makes this sacrifice, and Hawkgirl sort of comforts him as he dies, and as they stand around his grave, she admits she still doesn't fully understand why Grundy believed, or what it was he believed in as he passed away. And Aquaman just tells him that it's faith, and you're not necessarily supposed to understand it. And I just thought it was a really, really interesting thing, again, for what is a children's television show, to take a genuine, honest look at faith, and not really take a side over about the existence of a deity or non-existence of one, but just to say, to sort of explore through the lens of these superheroes, this is why people find comfort in their faith, why people believe what they believe, and why it's good to have something to believe in, or it often can be. And it's such an interesting and honest look at faith and religion as a whole that I just thought was so interesting that they managed to sort of fit that into 2 episodes of a children's cartoon.
And it features Rob Zombie in the voice cast. How many children's cartoons can say that they do both of those things? You know?
Exactly.
And do them well, let alone do them at all, but do them well. Yeah, it is an absolute classic, as you mentioned. That was episode 158. You ended up giving that a 38 out of 40. This very well could have made my top 5, but for the sake of not doubling up on a whole bunch of episodes, I gave this a 36 out of 40 also. So that would have tied my bottom for this list so far. But yeah, it's really good. You and I enjoyed it a lot. Again, one of those episodes that may be coming into it because it's not heavy on one of the members of the Trinity as much. You may think that it's not, or you know, it has some of these weird characters or this Lovecraftian homages to it that, you know, it's not going to be something that you can follow or appreciate. But at the end of the day, it's a very, very heartwarming look at this. It's certainly, there's some tragedy thrown in there. You'll laugh, you'll cry. You know, the whole Grundy story arc and the redemption of this character that is typically a one-dimensional Hulk ripoff, you know, a zombie Hulk essentially, or has been portrayed that way in the past. Ultimately, you know, is given quite the storyline to follow for this episode. So there's a lot about this episode to enjoy, and there's a reason, therefore, why it made that high on your list. So absolutely, that will bring us to my number 1, Liam, and the aforementioned Shadow of the Bat parts 1 and 2. That ended up being a 38 out of 40 for me. Of course, you can listen to that episode on episode 180. We covered that back in October. Liam, as you mentioned, this has the designation of being the debut of Batgirl, of course, leading up from the prior appearances from Barbara Gordon. Some of the, you know, we had Heart of Steel. She showed up in those episodes and sort of laid the groundwork for what would be her debut. But this is a great episode because it really puts the focus on her. There's a lot to enjoy from that episode music wise. There's some pretty awesome visuals in both parts. We get Two-Face as revealed as the main villain. We had a lot of nostalgia linked to that and love for that, from having that on the Warner Brothers home video release that we had.
Absolutely.
Sort of the perfect storm for enjoying that episode, but it wasn't straight nostalgia goggles. You know, we enjoyed the plot. You know, I ended up giving the plot a perfect 10, the music a perfect 10, and the voice acting a perfect 10. Really, the music is another thing that stands out. Multiple Batgirl themes in that episode. Melissa Gilbert making her debut as Batgirl, not her debut in the series, obviously having played Barbara Gordon before, but really making a huge impact and having some great chemistry with Lauren Lester and Kevin Conroy. So it's really a fun episode, one that you put on and you're tapping your toe to the music, you're enjoying it. There's tension in figuring out if Two-Face is going to figure out who Matches Malone really is and whether or not he's going to kill Batman. And we have the underwater subway scene that, again, I think goes against all of physics, but hey, it's super cool that they drive this subway through a flooded tunnel, and it's a lot of fun. And Gil Mason, never heard from again, but the tension in that final scene of him and Batgirl on the boat that's speeding towards the Statue of Liberty, for him to unmask Batgirl and for her to get the final say, and again, in a very much a Batman way, choose justice over vengeance, and you know, saving Gil from certain death. So it's a lot of fun and a great first debut for the Batgirl character in Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah, it feels like a crescendo. As you mentioned, there is so much build up in episodes that we have covered previously with introducing that character. So when she finally does suit up, it feels earned, and it feels like a really exciting, momentous moment or momentous occasion when she finally does suit up, and we hear that theme kick in, and we get those scenes of her in action. So yeah, it's a tremendous episode. And as you mentioned, we had the Adventures of Batman and Robin VHS tape, the Two-Face tape, featured these 2 episodes. So that's another reason this one's, I think, pretty special to us, is the amount of times that we saw this. I think you and I could probably almost quote this start to finish for both parts. So a lot of fun reliving that one this year.
Absolutely. William, that will bring us to your top episode of the year, which we've already mentioned, but again, goes outside of the DCAU, but there's a reason this one's the top pick for the year for you.
Yeah, I think this is in fact the only episode that either of us gave a perfect score to in 2021. That being, as you mentioned, the Batman Brave and the Bold episode, Chill of the Night, which we reviewed back in episode 175. It's a really interesting episode. It was completely different than kind of anything else they attempted in that series. So it's a departure for the series, but really, I think what we loved about it, and specifically what I loved, which pushed it to that perfect score, is that it really feels like it's a love letter to multiple eras of Batman. It's still very much the same character that you see in those other Brave and the Bold episode, this sort of self-serious sort of homage to the Silver Age of Batman, but you know, from the voice cast, you have not only do you have Kevin Conroy voicing the Phantom Stranger, Mark Hamill voicing the Spectre. You also had Adam West voicing Thomas Wayne, and Julie Newmar voicing Martha Wayne. There's a beautiful scene where Batman is sort of transported back in time and sees his parents and gets to sort of embrace his mother one last time, and then it all comes to a head as he has this moment where he is finally able to confront the man who killed his parents, and he has to sort of choose whether or not he's going to enact vengeance or justice, and is he going to arrest this guy, or is he going to kill him? And again, just the fact that this was tackled on what is still a children's cartoon, and that they allowed the story to go down that route and to be such a love letter to every era of Batman, I think is what really makes this stand head and shoulders above, at least for me, anything else that we reviewed in 2021.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because this was, we've mentioned it on the pod several times. This is a show that you were certainly more familiar with than I was in before we started this podcast. I had never seen an episode of it. I'd heard things about it. I've heard some of the fans that maybe didn't appreciate the lighter tone that some of the episodes took, at least initially. But it's interesting because even when we started this, way back in that first episode that we covered of Batman Brave and the Bold, which may have been the Attack of the Secret Santas.
I believe you're right. I think that's the first Elseworlds, and definitely first Brave and the Bold we ever covered.
So I remember as we were preparing for that, you had mentioned this episode specifically, that, you know, that this was something that I had to see, that this was something that I was going to enjoy, that it was something that was memorable, that a lot of people enjoyed, just simply from the departure from the normal storytelling. And every episode that we've covered of Batman Brave and the Bold, I think that I've enjoyed to really to my own surprise, because it's really enjoyable. It's not a straight up camp. It's very campy, but it doesn't make fun of Batman, which I think is a very thin line to walk. You know, Batman and Robin famously almost seemingly pokes fun in a negative way at Batman, versus, you know, maybe what the 60s Batman 66 did, where they were able to effectively tribute Batman and his iconic status while also kind of winking at the camera. And I feel like the show does that so well. And this episode in particular, though, my memory from this is simply that this episode would fit in any sort of animation of Batman. The storytelling, so unique. And I think that scene at the end where he's given the choice by the Spectre and the Phantom Stranger to sort of appearing over his shoulders, him being Bruce Wayne, as the angel and the devil on his shoulder, to convince him to whether or not to kill the man responsible for his parents' death. and for him to choose, to bring him to justice and not to exact vengeance on him, it's just classic Batman storytelling and very true to the character, and cemented this version of Batman as one of the versions of Batman to look to, especially in animation. It's so great. Everything about it is done so well. Of course, James Tucker responsible for that, Mr. Tucker, who was involved with lots of other DCAU projects, and of course the exciting new project upcoming, Batman Cape Crusader. But it's a memorable episode. It's one that deserves several rewatches, and if you haven't given it a chance, it deserves the opportunity to do that. Go stop the podcast right now and go watch that episode, Chill of the Night. It's a great one for many, many things. Overall, voice acting, music, animation, it's all great.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam. Well, that has wrapped us up for our top lists. We're going to quickly just mention our favorite things here. We'll go a little bit rapid fire for our favorite things, DCAU related. Believe it or not, 2021, here we are nearly 30 years after Batman, the animated series, originally debuted, and we are still getting some DCAU content and new things being added to the universe. Liam, we'll kick things off. I'll throw it over to you. What was one of your favorite things about the DCAU happening in the year 2021?
Well, yeah, I think the first one that really kicked us off early in the year, we got confirmation that there would in fact be a season 2 of Batman: The Adventures Continue, and we actually just recently in our bonus episodes covered the final issue of that season 2. But we were sort of alerted I believe in March that we would be getting more issues of this story, written of course by Alan Burnett and Paul Dini, and then with as we found out, a rotating cast of artists, which we will get to a little bit later in this list, in fact. But and of course the great Monica Cabino on colors throughout all of it. So just a really exciting time to know that we would be getting more DCAU content in comic form. But this year, The Adventures Continue was not alone on that front.
That's right. We shortly thereafter, in the just a little over a month after we got confirmation about season 2 of Batman: The Adventures Continue, we got an announcement about an exciting new comic book from the aforementioned James Tucker, J.M. DeMatteis, couple of the original writers from the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited series, that they were actually going to be a part of a team that was putting out a new comic book called Justice League Infinity that would pick up right after Justice League Unlimited had ended, kind of continuing the what if there had been an additional season of Justice League Unlimited or a show beyond that. And Liam, we are excited because we're just a few days away from the final issue of that series coming to an end here, and our coverage of that will kick off or wrap up rather next week. But that's something else, more DCAU content from creators. Of course, we had Ethan Beavers and Nick Filardi both on art and colors for that, and a story that's fascinating and went into various different aspects of the DCAU multiverse, places that we maybe did not expect, but had a lot of fun exploring and seeing some of these favorite characters, and being able to talk about these characters that we hadn't seen in some time.
Absolutely. A lot of fun, again, just like with Adventures Continue, just getting to see these characters again, find out some additional issues. And it isn't just much like with Adventures Continue, it isn't just a nostalgia grab. It isn't just sort of filler content with these characters. They are, I think, looking to push the story forward and tell a new story, and maybe even close up some loops that were left hanging from the last couple seasons of Justice League Unlimited. So it was so exciting to see that once again, like with Adventures Continue, we would have original people that worked on the show writing it, and then a pair of great artists in Mr. Beavers and Mr. Filardi who would be working on it from an art perspective as well, who also have experience working on different DCAU tie-in books. So a lot of great stuff coming out of that book. And as you said, we're just about to approach the finale here in the first week of 2022.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the artists, because as you mentioned, Ethan Beavers, Nick Filardi, great teamwork on the artwork for Justice League Infinity. However, one of the highlights, I would say, of 2021 when it comes to the DCAU, our next entry on our list is going to be the appearance and exciting debut in the DCAU tie-in comics of one Jordan Gibson. So Jordan was responsible and stepped in for issue number 4 of Batman: The Adventures Continue. We knew that Jordan was going to be doing a couple of the covers, and there are just some fantastic examples of not only the cover that was actually released, but some of the unreleased artwork that are just fantastic. But once we found out that, unfortunately, Ty Templeton would have to step away due to health reasons, still praying for a great recovery for Mr. Templeton. But Jordan stepped in and, I would say, knocked it out of the park on the first try, like one for one, making a major league debut, knocked in, hit a grand slam, like just incredible artwork. And dubbing Jordan and Monica as the world's finest. They earned that moniker based on that issue alone. Just an incredible team working together, and just some amazing artwork.
Yeah, it's a really, and that issue is kind of interesting in that it's very much a standalone story among this season that had a few different sort of multi-part storylines, but sort of in the middle of the with the third and fourth issues, we got these sort of mostly standalone stories. This one focusing very much on Renee Montoya and her life as a detective. And you could tell that both Jordan and, of course, as you mentioned, best friend of the show, Monica Cabina's colors on that issue, it very much has the look and the feel of, even though it is the new Batman Adventures style, it very much has a feel more of even really those really like those first 10 or so episodes of the animated series, when it's like the painting the backgrounds on black paper era of Batman the Animated Series. It's so like gritty and film noir on a lot of it, and you could just see every single page that both Jordan, who again we not only did we get that great variant cover for that issue, but then Jordan also provided the interior artwork with Monica on colors, and it's just it's a classic. It's one I've already revisited a few times since we reviewed it, and I'm sure I'll revisit it a few times more. And just what a treat that was to see a new artist, or at least an artist that we weren't as familiar with before this, break onto the scene in the DCAU and just have such immediate great success and impact on us, and I think every other DCAU fan who read that issue.
Absolutely. And I think this might not be the last that we hear of Jordan for our favorite things from the DCAU in 2021. But before we get to our next appearance by Jordan, we will mention, Liam, something that was near and dear and had been demanded for quite a long time from fans, especially since the HBO Max app had debuted and we saw these beautiful episodes of Superman the Animated Series in remastered high definition. The question was, when can we add a physical copy to our libraries? When can we have something that if our internet goes out, we can still go back and review? And our prayers were answered on September the 3rd as it was announced finally, after a few false starts, that in fact Superman the Animated Series would be coming to Blu-ray in completely remastered HD form later in the year, fixing even some of the issues that were on the HBO Max, including some green screens and some issues that were left in on a couple of the episodes by accident on the initial HD release. But man, this was something that fans, including yourself, of Superman alone, but of most people people from the DCAU have been clamoring for a long time, to finally get these episodes remastered, cleared up, cleaned up, and made bright and shiny, and for us to be able to hold them in our hands.
That's right. We're this was like getting the fourth Infinity Stone. Like we had sort of slowly over these last few years, as big milestone anniversaries had been hit. You've gotten Batman the Animated Series and the new Batman Adventures, of course, remastered on Blu-ray. We had gotten Batman Beyond, given the same treatment. Of course, Justice League and Justice League Unlimited had already been released on Blu-ray beforehand. But we were missing kind of one of the big four there, that being Superman. So it was a big deal to get that announced, and then for it to finally come out this year. It was a big deal, and that show does deserve to be revisited as often, I think, as those other series. So it's really cool that to have that option, to be able to watch that in HD, and as you said, to have a physical thing, if you're still more of a physical media person, to have that option rather than having to subscribe to the wonderful HBO Max streaming service. Not that there's anything wrong with having to subscribe to that wonderful service, but if you prefer the physical piece in your hand, I understand that these Blu-rays would be right up your alley.
Absolutely. Again, not a paid sponsorship, but we gladly make it one.
Absolutely.
And rounding out our order of best things in the DCAU in 2021, Liam, is the aforementioned Jordan Gibson's contribution in the very recently released "'Tis the Season to Be Freezin" short story, Window Shopping. So DC announced, I believe, in early December, actually maybe early November, that they were going to be releasing sort of what they used to call annuals or one shots. They're called lots of different things. I think holiday specials. I don't know what they ended up calling this one, but it's a compilation of stories that are kind of standalone and don't have anything to do or don't necessarily affect standard continuity, usually getting special guest artists and writers to write stories or short stories, making it a monumental issue. They charge a little bit more for it because it's a bigger issue, and it hits newsstands during a time where there's a lot of vacations, more than likely, so it gives the people some time off. But this one was exciting because we learned that Jordan and Monica were once again going to be teaming up. World's Finest reunited, Alan Burnett and Paul Dini on with the story, and then Jordan on pencils, Monica on colors. And we kind of got snippets and previews from Jordan's Twitter throughout the month, and we began seeing these images of Mr. Freeze and some homages that looked very similar to a Batman Adventures holiday special back in the early 90s, a classic book for most Batman the Animated Series fans, and certainly near and dear to our hearts. But boy, did we get rewarded with the full story that we just recently covered. We don't have to go into full detail of it, but Liam, I think it's funny because you predicted just from the shots and the images, the preview shots, that this was likely going to be your favorite story of the year. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it lived up to the hype.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. I'd have to really go over what I read, but that would definitely be. It's on the short list at the very least, because it is a spectacular. It's everything you want from a holiday Batman the Animated Series story, and the character of Robin, specifically Tim Drake, is very, very special to me. So getting to see that character in the spotlight and have that moment and where he sort of gets a connection with Mr. Freeze as Mr. Freeze sort of explains why he's going on this rampage in Gotham, and you sort of have this small subplot of Tim sort of working to get the perfect gift for Bruce for Christmas, and you have sort of this nice little epilogue as Tim not only gets the gift and takes care of it, but Mr. Freeze sort of willingly lets himself be captured and taken back to jail, and Tim sort of gives him a present as well to sort of help maybe lighten his mood around the holidays as well. So it's a really perfect little story, and it was a great capper to the year of DCAU comic book stories.
That's right. And a few honorable mentions here that we'll give before we go, Liam. We got the return of everyone's favorite DCAU character, Mr. Wing, to the world of Batman: The Adventures Continue. After making a brief appearance in issue 6, he made a full triumphant multi-page return in issue number 7 that we just covered. So more Mr. Wing in 2021, and hopefully more on the horizon if they continue to do more Batman: The Adventures Continue. And then, of course, I think the biggest exciting thing in sort of DCAU adjacent was the announcement, of course, of Batman Caped Crusader, a Batman animated show helmed by Bruce Timm. And we learned just a few months ago, James Tucker also responsible. Of course, J.J. Abrams involved, and Matt Reeves. Yeah. So some pretty brilliant minds and big names and people that we're familiar with going to be in charge of a animated series that was dubbed from the featurette more Batman the Animated Series than Batman the Animated Series by Bruce Timm. So something to look forward to, maybe in 2022, more likely for 2023, but still exciting to talk about that stuff, and certainly exciting to know that there's more Batman on the horizon. And hey, there's even a new Batman the Animated Series podcast that's coming out, I think, that we learned, with Kevin Conroy involved as Batman.
Yeah, some kind of audio drama with at least some of the original cast returning. So that's going to be exciting. It seems like DC and Warner Brothers has been tipping their toes into more podcast audio drama serialized stuff, and it looks like some of the DCAU veterans will get a chance to reprise their roles in those as well.
So the future seems very bright, even if it isn't very bright in a lot of areas. There's a lot of bright and exciting things to talk about for the DCAU. It's been one heck of a year, Liam. We are ready to turn that page, though, and get back into doing some more reviews, which I look forward to doing with you for the rest of 2022. We have some big milestones coming up here. We're going to have hopefully some more guest correspondents, including perhaps one Jordan Gibson. Looking forward to perhaps getting Jordan on the podcast in the not too distant future. More things to cover, including, Liam, perhaps, as you've been anticipating, the very first episode of Zeta Project to be crossed off the list here. Lots of exciting firsts.
A day which will live in infamy. Yes, it's coming, and it's probably coming soon, believe it or not. So
that's right. But we thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Let us know what your favorite episode, perhaps, or episodes that we covered in 2021. Tweet Liam at DCAU Review, or leave a comment on one of our posts at DCAU Review. You can also, of course, leave us a 5-star review if you like the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and let people know what it is that you enjoy about the podcast. Of course, if you'd like to support us, you can do that a couple different ways. You can buy a shirt or a piece of merch. Head over to DCAUreview.com and click on the store tab. You can also check the link at the bottom of this podcast in your app. There's a link there to support the pod. And of course, you can also do it in a very financially responsible way. And that is something that costs you $0. Head over to YouTube and subscribe to the Pod Tower, where we are a part of with our friends from Watchtower Database and, of course, Tim Talk. Liam, it's been a great year. We're looking forward to 2022, and I can't wait to do more podcasts with you.
Absolutely. As Commissioner Gordon said, here's to survival, everyone.
There we go. Absolutely. Well, until next week, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you on the next episode of DCAU Review.
Happy New Year.